Welcome to the world's very first university.
Shocking truth. The world's first university was founded by a Muslim woman, and history tried to bury it. Why hasn't the world told you this? When we think of the origins of modern education, universities, libraries, centers of learning, most of us immediately picture grand European halls, Ivy League institutions, and Western scholars in cloaks of academia. We've been fed a very specific narrative. But what if we told you that the world's very first university wasn't in Oxford, Cambridge, or even Athens? It was in Fez, Morocco. And the founder? A Muslim woman. Yes, you read that right. Long before Europe emerged from the Dark Ages, before Harvard ever opened its gates, before the printing press changed the world, a woman named Fatima al-Fihri made history. And not with armies, not with politics, not with gold, but with knowledge. So why has her name been wiped from your textbooks? Why isn't she celebrated like Newton, Da Vinci, or Galileo? Because Fatima al-Fihri breaks the narrative. Who was Fatima al-Fihri? Born in the 9th century in present-day Tunisia, Fatima al-Fihri came from a wealthy, devout Muslim family that had settled in Fez, Morocco. At a time when much of Europe was struggling through intellectual stagnation, the Islamic world was experiencing a golden age of science, literature, mathematics, medicine, and architecture. Fatima's father was a successful merchant, and after his death, she inherited a fortune. But what she did with that wealth, that's what makes her legendary. Instead of indulging in the lavish lifestyle she easily could have afforded, Fatima made a decision that would change human history forever. She built a mosque, not uncommon for a woman of wealth. But then she expanded it. She created classrooms, lecture halls, a library that would become home to thousands of rare manuscripts, and study spaces that welcomed students from all walks of life. This wasn't just a mosque anymore. This was something entirely new. She had accidentally created a university, centuries before the term would even exist in the Western world. The University of al-Qarawiyyin, the world's first degree-granting institution. Founded in 859 CE, the University of al-Qarawiyyin, sometimes spelled Al-Qarawin, is officially recognized by UNESCO and the Guinness World Records as the oldest continuously operating degree-granting university in the world. Let that sink in. Before Oxford, before Bologna, before the Sorbonne. It was Fatima al-Fihri, a Muslim woman who created the model of higher education that would influence the globe. Courses at al-Qarawiyyin ranged from mathematics, astronomy, and chemistry to theology, law, and languages. Scholars from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East flocked to its halls, and its influence spread far beyond Morocco. But you won't hear this story in mainstream classrooms. Why? Because it doesn't fit the Western myth of intellectual superiority. Islam and women in education. The reality that challenges modern stereotypes. Mainstream media today often portrays Muslim women as oppressed, silent, veiled shadows in the background of male-dominated societies.
But Fatima al-Fihri's story explodes that narrative. She was a Muslim woman in the 9th century, not only educated, but empowered, respected, and capable of leading monumental societal change. And she wasn't alone. History is filled with examples of educated Muslim women from the Islamic Golden Age, from Lubna of Cordoba, a mathematician and poet, to Rufaida al-Aslamiyah, often considered the first female nurse and surgeon in Islam. So why is Fatima's story so rarely told? Because it forces a reckoning. It forces us to admit that the foundations of modern education owe a debt to Muslim civilizations and to Muslim women. What the West won't tell you. The Eurocentric rewrite of educational history. Western historical narratives have long centered around the myth that intellectual advancement began in ancient Greece, went dark during the Middle Ages, and was miraculously resurrected during the European Renaissance. But the truth is much more complex and far more uncomfortable for those clinging to Eurocentric ideals. During Europe's so-called Dark Ages, the Islamic world was producing revolutionary advancements in algebra, al-Khawarizmi, medicine, Ibn Sina, optics, Ibn al-Haytham, philosophy, Averroes, al-Farabi, and astronomy, al-Battani. And while this intellectual explosion was taking place, Fatima al-Fihri was building a university that would become the template for centuries of scholarship. So why the silence? Why the erasure? Why is Fatima's name not mentioned alongside Socrates or Galileo? Because empowered Muslim women don't fit the colonizer script. The Hidden Legacy: How al-Qarawiyyin Influenced Europe. It wasn't just an isolated marvel in Fez. The University of al-Qarawiyyin became a beacon of knowledge that directly influenced the rise of European universities. Through the translation movement in Islamic Spain, scholars who studied at al-Qarawiyyin or studied the works produced there translated Arabic texts into Latin. These texts later found their way into European universities, jump-starting the Renaissance. The works of Aristotle, preserved by Muslim scholars. The concept of zero, transmitted from India through Arabic mathematics. The foundations of chemistry, rooted in Islamic alchemy. But again, where is Fatima al-Fihri's name in this historical lineage? Buried, overshadowed, almost erased. Not because she didn't matter, but because she mattered too much. Fatima al-Fihri was not an exception. She was the blueprint. The idea that a Muslim woman could found the first university shatters countless stereotypes in one stroke. But here's the even more shocking truth. Fatima wasn't an outlier. She was a reflection of what Islamic civilization nurtured at its height. A culture where education was sacred, where women were respected as intellectual leaders, and where knowledge was a divine obligation. From the Qur'an's first revealed word, Iqra, meaning read, to prophetic sayings that encouraged seeking knowledge even if it is in China, Islam's relationship with education has always been revolutionary. Fatima al-Fihri took that message literally. She used her wealth, privilege, and faith not for personal power, but to build a legacy that would outlive empires. But you were never meant to know that. How Fatima al-Fihri's vision shaped the modern university model. The University of al-Qarawiyyin wasn't just a collection of classrooms. It was a living system, an educational ecosystem that laid the groundwork for what we now recognize as the modern university. And yet, most academic institutions today barely whisper her name. Think about it. A structured curriculum, multiple disciplines under one roof, credentialed degrees after demonstrated mastery, libraries, lecture halls, and student lodgings. scholars from across regions gathering in one place. Sound familiar? That's not Bologna, that's not Paris, that's al-Qarawiyyin in the 9th century. And it wasn't a coincidence. Fatima al-Fihri was creating a legacy deliberately, a space where minds could grow, where ideas could evolve, and where knowledge could be passed from one generation to the next. This wasn't just an act of charity, it was an act of civilizational vision. She wasn't trying to replicate something else, she was inventing it, and the rest of the world would follow her lead, whether it admitted it or not.
The library that put others to shame. One of the most extraordinary aspects of al-Qarawiyyin was its library, considered by historians to be one of the oldest and most significant in the world. It housed thousands of manuscripts, including rare texts on astronomy, medicine, theology, and mathematics, many handwritten and preserved for centuries. Among them, a 9th century Quran written in Kufic calligraphy, and early scientific treatises that would later influence the European Enlightenment. And here's the kicker. The library was not closed off to women. At a time when even European men struggled for access to such institutions, Muslim women in North Africa could study, teach, and engage in academic life. So why is it that the oldest university library in the world, founded by a Muslim woman, is barely known to the global public? Because it doesn't just rewrite history, it threatens the monopoly on who gets to be seen as a founder of knowledge. From North Africa to the world, the ripple effect of al-Qarawiyyin cannot be overstated. Scholars from Andalusia, Muslim Spain, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa came to Fez to study. They took what they learned and carried it across borders. Not just physical borders, but intellectual ones. Fez became a transcontinental knowledge hub, where Christian and Jewish scholars studied alongside Muslims. African travelers brought texts back to Timbuktu and beyond, and European academics accessed preserved classical knowledge forgotten in their own lands through Arabic translations. And while the West would later repackage this knowledge as its own rediscovery, the intellectual trail always leads back to places like Fez, Baghdad, Cordoba, and people like Fatima al-Fihri. She wasn't just building a building, she was constructing a pipeline of human advancement. But again, you were never meant to connect the dots. Rewriting the story. Why this truth was erased. Let's not be naive. The erasure of Fatima al-Fihri's contribution isn't accidental. It's part of a deliberate pattern, one that rewrites history through a colonial, Eurocentric lens. This pattern glorifies European male scholars as lone geniuses, minimizes or ignores the Islamic world's impact on science and education, paints Muslim women as oppressed and voiceless, never visionaries or builders of civilization. But Fatima breaks all those molds. A Muslim woman, in the 9th century, creating the world's first university in a thriving intellectual Islamic empire. This isn't just inconvenient to Western narratives, it's explosive. Because once you accept Fatima's story as fact, and it is, you have to rethink everything. Everything you were told about where progress comes from. Everything you were taught about who builds the future. Everything you assumed about women in Islam. So instead, history pushed her to the margins. Not because she didn't belong in the center, but because she owned it.
The tragedy of forgotten genius. Why Fatima's story matters more than ever. In today's world, where Islamophobia still poisons political discourse and Muslim women continue to fight against both external stereotypes and internal challenges, Fatima al-Fihri is not just a figure of the past, she is a beacon for the future. Her story matters because it reclaims the narrative. It demands that Muslim girls around the world know that their heritage includes founders of universities, architects of civilization, and leaders of revolutions, not in spite of their faith, but because of it. It challenges Western feminists to recognize that empowerment doesn't always wear the same outfit, that a hijab and a degree can coexist, and have for over 1,000 years. It forces academia to confront the uncomfortable truth that the very structure it holds sacred was pioneered by someone it refuses to name. And it calls on all of us, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, to finally tell the whole story of human progress, not just the Eurocentric chapter. Modern media versus historical reality. The war over the Muslim woman's image. If Fatima al-Fihri were alive today, how would she be portrayed? Let's be brutally honest. She'd be reduced to a headline, veiled and oppressed, her identity stripped down to fit a media narrative that can't handle nuance, power, or complexity. She'd be tokenized, dissected, debated, not celebrated as a visionary. Western media has spent decades, centuries even, crafting a single-dimensional image of Muslim women, passive, silent, faceless, trapped. And yet, Fatima al-Fihri stands in direct defiance of that entire stereotype. A woman of wealth, education, influence, and faith, who transformed the world with her intellect. How do you erase that? By design. The system doesn't allow for complexity when that complexity threatens its own myth. The myth that the West is the birthplace of everything modern. The myth that Muslim societies contributed little more than minarets and mysticism. The myth that women of faith can't be leaders, engineers of thought, or global changemakers. But Fatima's existence is a glitch in that matrix. So they did what systems always do when they encounter inconvenient truths. They buried her. The domino effect of erasure. What happens when we don't know our history? What happens when young women grow up never hearing the name Fatima al-Fihri? They believe the lie that they come from silence. They're told they have to become something, as if they weren't born from a legacy of innovation, leadership, and scholarship. And it's not just Muslim women who suffer from this erasure, it's everyone. Because the moment you cut off the full story of human achievement, you limit the imagination of what's possible. You create false hierarchies of intelligence. You create false hierarchies of culture. You create false hierarchies of gender. You create a world where the real founders are footnotes, and the footnotes become gods. And that is not just historical injustice, that is intellectual theft. From Fez to feminism. Why Fatima al-Fihri is the feminist icon the West won't acknowledge. Let's talk about feminism for a second. Western feminism has long been centered around the image of the white, secular, educated woman breaking free from the past. But what if the past wasn't what you thought it was? What if, in 859 CE, nearly 1,000 years before women in Europe could even attend the university, let alone establish one, a Muslim woman was already leading the way? Fatima al-Fihri's feminism wasn't performative. It wasn't published in think pieces or shouted through protests. It was built into architecture, inked into manuscripts, etched into stone, and passed down through the thousands of scholars educated in the university she birthed. She didn't just challenge patriarchy, she outsmarted it. She didn't ask for permission to be great. She just was. And she didn't need to imitate Western models of empowerment to prove her worth. Her Islamic values, her modesty, her faith, and her fierce intellect coexisted without contradiction. She is the feminist icon the world needs,
and the one the Western world refuses to embrace. Why? Because acknowledging her would mean admitting that the blueprint for empowerment was never theirs to begin with.
The revival begins with you, reclaiming Fatima's legacy today. So what do we do with this truth? We reclaim it, we teach it, we amplify it. Because Fatima al-Fihri is more than a historical figure. She is a call to action. For Muslim women, her story is a reminder. You don't come from weakness, you come from brilliance. For educators, it's a wake-up call. Your curriculum is incomplete without her. For media, it's a challenge. Tell the story fully or stop pretending you care about women's empowerment. And for every young girl staring at a world that tells her she has to choose between her faith and her future, Fatima al-Fihri stands tall in the shadows, whispering the truth that history tried to silence. You are already enough. You always were. What would Fatima do? A blueprint for solving the global education crisis. Right now, over 129 million girls around the world are out of school, in war zones, in refugee camps, in rural villages, in patriarchal systems that treat education as an optional, especially for women. And yet, over a millennium ago, a Muslim woman, with no government funding, no international NGO, no Twitter hashtag, created a space where education was not only accessible, but sacred. What does that say about us now? How is it that with all our technology, institutions, and modern resources, we are still failing where she succeeded? Because Fatima didn't just throw money at a problem. She created a system that made learning sustainable. She structured the institution around lifelong knowledge, not temporary charity. She embedded education into the spiritual and cultural fabric of the city. She made learning a duty, not a luxury. She built an institution that would outlive her by centuries. Today's global education leaders, from ministries to nonprofits, should be studying her model. Because while the world debates whether educating girls is too difficult in fragile states, Fatima already gave us the blueprint. She didn't wait for the right time. She didn't beg for permission. She just built the future in stone, ink, and unshakable belief. Decolonizing the mind. Why knowing her story is a revolutionary act. Let's be clear. Remembering Fatima al-Fihri is not just historical trivia. It's revolutionary. Because every time you speak her name, you tear down centuries of whitewashed history. You reclaim space in academic circles that have long excluded Muslim voices. You decolonize the image of what a founder looks like. In doing so, you're not just honoring one woman. You're breaking open the gates of knowledge equity. And the impact is profound. For Muslim girls, it replaces shame with pride. For Western educators, it reveals blind spots they never knew they had. And for global feminists, it forces a long overdue reckoning with their own hierarchies of power. Her name is more than a name. It's a challenge to the system. It's a sword through the sanitized story of Western supremacy. It's a reminder that greatness does not require permission, and never has.
Fatima al-Fihri in the digital age, the Reawakening has begun. Let's bring this full circle from 859 CE to right now. In an age of disinformation, digital noise, and algorithmic distractions, Fatima al-Fihri's legacy is re-emerging, and it's coming through you. Every time her story is shared on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, or in a classroom, the erasure cracks. Every time a Muslim girl reads her name and realizes her ancestors were not behind but ahead, the silence shatters. Every time someone Googles first university in the world and finds her face instead of a stone cathedral in Europe, the truth wins. And it's not just about writing the past, it's about owning the future. We are standing at a crossroads right now. One path continues the legacy of exclusion, erasure, and empire-driven storytelling. The other embraces the full, rich, messy, powerful global history of human advancement, with Fatima al-Fihri sitting not in the shadows, but at the center. You decide which world we build. Because if Fatima could do what she did over 1100 years ago in a male-dominated society, without the internet, without institutional support, imagine what we can do with her story finally in our hands. Conclusion: the name they tried to erase. Now, it's yours to remember. So now you know. The world's first university was not founded in Europe. It wasn't created by a king, a pope, or a famous Western philosopher. It was founded by a Muslim woman, Fatima al-Fihri, in 859 CE, in Fez, Morocco, before Oxford, before Harvard, before the word university even existed. And they didn't want you to know that. They buried her beneath centuries of silence, rewrote her out of history, and sold you a version of progress that erased the very woman who pioneered it. But not anymore, because you've seen the truth. And the question now is, what will you do with it? Will you pass it on? Will you challenge the narratives you've been fed? Will you help reclaim the legacy of a woman who proved that knowledge is not Western, not male, not colonial, but universal? This is bigger than history. This is about the future and who gets to shape it. So speak her name, Fatima al-Fihri, not a footnote, not a myth, a founder, a feminist, a force. And now, finally, a name the world will never forget again.